On Tuesday, in a totally expected move, the House of Representatives voted to kill the national emergency on the southern border. The bill has now passed over to the Senate and they will be voting on it, but they haven't set a date yet. The House was very expected to pass this bill, the bill that was proposed by Juan Castro, and the Senate was initially expected to kill it. But Rand Paul and a few other Republicans throughout the Senate have cast some shade on this idea, and now we don't know whether or not it will pass the Senate. The text of this joint resolution is actually very simple. Basically, it says that the national emergency is terminated, and it cites all of the national statutes that allow Congress to terminate the national emergency. As simple as it is, it's not going to spend a lot of time in committee. In fact, in the House, it barely spent any time in committee at all. But by laws, it was still referred to the appropriate committees: Transportation and Infrastructure in the House and the Armed Services Committee in the Senate. If you read through the National Emergencies Act, and I recommend that you do, you would see that 50 U.S.C. 1622 is the prescription that allows a joint resolution to end the president's national emergency. This was actually a little bit confusing when I first read through, because the way the text was written, it almost reads like Congress would have to come up with an additional solution in order to end the national emergency. But a further study through the Cornell Law University website shows that this is simply not the case. A simple joint resolution is all that's needed from both houses of Congress to get passed by the president and end the national emergency. And that would have been a simple thing to prevent, except for the fact that Rand Paul has stated right out that he is going to vote in favor of this continuing resolution and send it to the president's desk. As was expected, the House of Representatives passed the joint resolution, the final count being 245 to 182. This was actually a very party line vote. There were very few Republicans that did jump ship in order to go and vote with the Democrats on this one, the final count being 13 GOP members. And this seems like a very steep margin, but when you look at the size of the House of Representatives, you quickly realize that it's actually only a 56% margin. In the Senate, the usual suspects are planning on joining the left. You've got Collins, Murkowski, Tillis was planning to do so. So we were looking at this was going to be a 50-50 vote, with Pence being the tiebreaker. But then Rand Paul came out and said that he was planning on joining the Democrats in the Senate to get this joint resolution passed and end the national emergency. That does bring us to 51 and the simple majority that it would take to put the resolution to the president's desk. But Rand Paul is not the only member of the GOP in the Senate that is planning on going over to the Democrat side, and we are well outside of the usual suspects in this. Even before the Senate has had a chance to vote on this, the executive branch has issued a statement stating that the president already plans to veto the bill if it does make it to his desk. Interestingly enough, this would be the first veto of the Trump administration. The last veto that we had was in September of 2016, and it was the Justice for the Sponsors of Terrorism Act. It's understandable the fact that the president had a House and a Senate that were both GOP controlled by the same party that he ran as, so there wouldn't be much reason that many people would see to veto any bills that came from there. But it's still interesting the fact that Trump was supposed to be such an authoritarian, and yet he has yet to veto any bill that's come to his desk. As we remember from Schoolhouse Rock, if the president does openly veto a bill, it goes back to Congress. And then Congress would need a 2/3 majority in both of the houses in order to override the veto. And that's a very unlikely scenario sitting in the situation that we were in. We had a 56% vote in the House to pass the joint resolution, and right now we are projected at having a 51% majority in the Senate to pass the resolution as well. Even though it may go higher, it's very unlikely it will get to 66 votes in the Senate. Therefore, this bill will likely fail, and that will be the end of it, and we will go back to being under a national emergency. I find it interesting that we're actually watching all of this go down in real time right now, and I do understand the frustration of many of the Trump faithful who believe that the president and the Congress should have come together to pass this resolution while they had a majority in both chambers and the presidency, but in reality it wasn't as simple as that. Resolutions for spending require more than just the simple majority. Now, they could have invoked the nuclear option and done it with just the simple majority, but we've seen what happens when the nuclear option comes out. The rules get changed in somebody's favor, and suddenly the rules get used against the party in power. Furthermore, I find it very interesting the fact that many members of Congress have come to the mainstream news outlets and to Twitter to cite the fact that the president using the National Emergencies Act is unconstitutional. Now, this may be why many members of the GOP from both chambers, especially those in vulnerable districts, have jumped the fence in order to join the Senate Democrats and the Congressional Democrats in voting the National Emergencies Act down. But let's be realistic about one thing. Back in 1976, Congress legally ceded this power to the president in order to use in any way that he wished. According to the bill, there is no stipulation as to what the president can use this on, but this may go and be challenged, rewritten, or go over to the Supreme Court to test the constitutionality of it, and that may change in the near future. What this joint resolution has done was bring all of this back down into the forefront where we can all see this happen again in real time. We now have an opportunity to go out and watch the levers of government as they get pulled and turned, and watch the process, something we haven't had a chance to do in a very long time. And cable news and the internet have given us a unique perspective into how our government works, and a unique ability to actually watch it happen as it's happening rather than get reported by the news hours later while we're sitting down to dinner. And of course, because it's Donald Trump, it's going to get televised for everything. Barack Obama had 12 vetoes, but I had to go back and look that up because we never got any coverage of any of them happening. They just happened, were ignored, and were swept under the rug. And the fact that everything in this new administration is televised really makes me feel great about the transparency of our government suddenly. It may not be perfect on Capitol Hill right now, but at least we get to see what's going on and we get to interact with it in real time, something we've rarely had a chance to do at any other time in history. What do you think about the joint resolution, and what do you think about the fact that there are GOP congresspeople crossing the aisle to vote for it? I always welcome a thoughtful and positive discussion in the comment section below, and especially over on Twitter. That is at EdsBlog Twitter with a 1 in place of the I. Thanks as always for listening to this show and supporting this channel. And remember, never take the words of bloggers, podcasters, or journalists as gospel. Find all the facts and draw your own conclusions. Take care. You're